A young woman was found on the floor of her own apartment. The police began their investigation and immediately uncovered several very alarming facts. It turned out that the residents of this complex had long noticed something strange and lived in fear. During the investigation, the detectives learned more and more horrifying details until they finally arrived at an unexpected truth. But that was only the beginning. Stephanie Bennett was born on April 30, 1979, in a small American town called Rocky Mount, Virginia. When she was little, her parents divorced, and Stephanie stayed to live with her mom. However, her father lived nearby their home, and the girl continued to see him almost every day. Later on, her father remarried, and Stephanie gained a stepsister named Diana. After school, she enrolled at Roanoke College, located 350 kilometers away from her home. In her final year of college, she met a guy named Walter, and soon they started dating. After college graduation, the couple moved to different cities, but remained together. Stephanie relocated to Raleigh City in North Carolina along with her stepsister Diana and their mutual friend Emily. The three of them rented an apartment in Bridgeport residential complex, situated in a quiet, peaceful neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The girl got a job at IBM, while her boyfriend moved to Greenville City in South Carolina to pursue an engineering degree. Stephanie lived in Raleigh for about a year by then. She planned with sister and friend to move apart into different cities. At that time, when she just turned 23 years old, Stephanie intended moving over Greenville where his boyfriend resided, as they already started looking for accommodation options together. In May, Stephanie traveled down Greenville, where both herself and Walter viewed some apartments, selecting one suitable for rent purposes. Upon returning back Raleigh City, none among friends or sisters were present there anymore. Emily shifted elsewhere, whereas Diana left for a few days, attending funerals somewhere else. On evening May 20th, after work hours, Stephanie conversed over phone call with Walter, who intended sending lease agreement via fax so that lady could sign it off upon receiving next day during office hours using workplace computer system. Next day he tried reaching out multiple times, but no response came either through work or home phone lines, which led him contacting sister instead, who later reached out colleagues, finding out Steph didn't show up office premises, which seemed quite odd. She always took responsibility towards work duties. If unwell, would have informed management accordingly, besides should be resting back home, yet not answering calls raised concerns, further leading Diana requesting another friend checking up apartment, ensuring everything's fine inside. However, knocking door yielded no response, prompting manager and locking door using spare key upon request made over phone line by Diana, witnessing dreadful sight once entered room. Stephanie laid lifeless on floor, without any signs alive, hence manager instantly dialed police emergency hotline, revealing cause death being strangulation, determined by investigating officers thereafter. It is noteworthy that the criminal took with him the object with which he killed the girl, as the police never managed to find it in the apartment. Meanwhile, investigators interviewed all residents of this complex, hoping that someone might have seen the killer. During the conversations, police officers found out that something strange had been happening in the residential complex for several months. People regularly noticed a certain person who was spying on residents through their apartment windows. They complained to the manager, but the management of the complex could not find him. Interestingly, at least once, this person was spotted at Stephanie's window. Moreover, near a lake not far from the complex, an unknown man assaulted a girl who went for a run several months ago. After this incident, Stephanie was afraid to stay alone in this apartment and wanted to move to Greenville as soon as possible. Detectives surveyed the area around the complex and discovered something strange. In bushes they found dozens of pieces of women's lingerie, which later turned out to belong to Stephanie. The police thought that perhaps the killer took them out of her apartment, but then threw them away in bushes for some reason. However, soon this version was refuted. It turned out that a teenager living in a neighboring apartment regularly sneaked into Stephanie's room and stole her delicate lingerie before throwing it into bushes himself. He confessed when questioned by investigators about all residents' activities, but denied his involvement in murder. A DNA sample was taken from him and did not match with semen sample obtained from killer. Hence he stopped being suspected of committing crime. Police considered that most obvious candidate for murderer role is same man who repeatedly spied on female residents through windows of complex. After talking with everyone who had ever noticed this man, detectives compiled an approximate portrait published in newspapers without yielding any results. As part standard procedure, victim's boyfriend checked voluntarily gave his DNA, which didn't match killer's sample either. Moreover, during time murder, Walter located hundreds kilometers away home, physically couldn't be there. Then policemen visited every male resident asking voluntary provide their DNA samples, also without success. Experts received no matches among collected samples, leaving them clueless. Detectives organized surveillance over residential complex, hoping catch Peeping Tom. Eventually succeeded surprisingly quickly, noticing Christopher Lee Campin approaching few ground floor windows, peeking inside apartments. Perverts already convicted voyeurism harassment woman 3 years earlier. Detectives initially thought finally caught murderer, only faced disappointment. Christopher's DNA didn't match sample found victim body. Charged voyeurism ceased suspecting involved killing. Since then continued work case lacking substantial leads. Year later, lead detective heard laboratory Florida capable determining individual ethnic background based on DNA existence. However, he had doubts about this technology, but the detective did not want to miss such an opportunity. So as a test, he sent the DNA of 4 of his colleagues of different ethnic backgrounds there. The experts successfully completed the task at 100%. And the detective handed over to them the DNA of Stephanie's killer. In the laboratory, it was established that the owner of the DNA was white, but this information did not help the police much. In August 2003, the victim's father offered a reward of $100,000 for any information leading to the capture of the killer. Her mother wrote a letter published in local newspapers begging people to share with police any information that could help identify a suspect. All this brought some new leads, but they led nowhere. In April 2004, detectives decided to re-interview all residents of the complex. Based on testimonies from numerous witnesses, they speculated that arrested man for voyeurism might not have been alone in walking around near buildings and peering into windows at night. Knowing who this first man was and having his photos in hand, investigators wanted to talk again with residents who had seen him lurking around. Unfortunately, none had ever seen his face. Most often this man appeared during dark hours. Witnesses mentioned seeing him without a hood, but were only able to make out that he had long hair. Detectives interviewed several dozen people until finally reaching a man who saw this person right outside Stephanie's window even before her murder occurred. His testimony was already known by police, but this time he remembered something else too. He claimed to have seen this person days after that incident during daylight hours while walking his dog near wooded areas. For some time he observed him until he disappeared behind trees with his Labrador Retriever. Apparently, the witness simply forgot about it, thinking it wasn't related to murder, hence didn't mention it initially when questioned by authorities. Investigators obtained these details only 2 years after Stephanie's death. Now they knew they should be looking for a man with a Labrador Retriever. Seeing how close a beware witness spotted him walked is where another residential complex stood. Police headed there asking employees if among residents there was someone owning such breed. They immediately named Drew Planton, a 35-year-old, and added few interesting details. All employees considered him slightly odd. He barely spoke with anyone, didn't look others in eyes, and overall very unsociable. The thin man sported long hair, always dressed baggy clothes. Many thought he tried attracting least attention possible. Yet, in his case, it worked quite opposite. Police decided to learn more about him, speaking elderly resident, whom according staff kept tabs on everything happening within complex. Here awaited them rather unexpected turn of events. When they told her that they were investigating the murder of Stephanie Bennett, the woman replied, "Haven't you arrested anyone yet? Everyone knows it was that guy with the big dog." The detectives were, to say the least, shocked. It took them 2 years to track down this man. The residents of the complex initially suspected this man, but none of them felt it necessary to share their suspicions with the police. It turned out that Drew had moved away from this complex and settled in another part of town because of it. Investigators decided to talk to him and went to his apartment, but no one responded to their knock on the door. They came there several times at different times of day and never received an answer. Either the man was never home, or he deliberately did not open the door for them. While they tried to tell Drew about this, police officers interviewed his former neighbors at his previous place of residence. They managed to find several witnesses who shared alarming facts. A woman living on a floor above saw Drew in company with a young guy a few days after Stephanie's murder. They were walking down the street and talking about something. Investigators immediately concluded that the young man was indeed that teenager who had been stealing underwear from the victim's apartment. Several women immediately reported being seriously afraid of Drew. They noticed him during jogs or walks in deserted places. He would stare intently at them or literally follow them. Detectives who still couldn't speak with Drew found out where he worked and went there. He was a chemist in a fertilizer production laboratory, and investigators managed to catch him at work. He immediately stated that he hadn't heard about Stephanie Bennett's murder. Drew told investigators they could come over at an appointed time, and he would answer all their questions. The detectives met him at his apartment. During conversation, he claimed he had never walked his dog near Stephanie's complex. Given that there were numerous witnesses who repeatedly saw him in that area, the investigators immediately realized he was lying. The man also claimed not wearing glasses, although his driver's license indicated he must wear them while driving. Several witnesses said that person peeking into windows wore glasses. Predictably, Drew refused to voluntarily provide his DNA sample. So, detectives decided to surveil him, hoping to obtain a sample by other means. But his task proved very difficult, since he left no items behind that could be sent to lab. For example, during lunch breaks he would leave work, get into his car, and just sit there, stirring a tone point. Hadn't eat anything, so investigators couldn't get any objects containing his DNA. Afterwards, police tried getting his scratch, but they faced failure here too. For several days they didn't see Drew taking it out. Notably, the man's neighbors also couldn't recall ever seeing him with a trash bag. Next, the investigators asked for help from Drew's boss. The woman agreed to help them obtain some item from his workplace that could contain the man's DNA. The boss watched him for several days, but they still couldn't get any items. Drew rarely ate at work, never threw anything away, and she couldn't find a single hair on his desk. Considering that the man had long enough hair, this seemed strange. Investigators were already convinced that Drew was intentionally covering up all traces so they couldn't get his DNA. One day the boss saw him tying his hair with a rubber band. Then he bent down and collected all the hairs that fell on the floor in the process. After that, the woman decided to invite him for a lunch break at a cafe to supposedly discuss some work matters. But here the man was extremely cautious. He mostly ate with his hands, put all used napkins in his pocket, and even took out the straw from his drink glass. For dessert, they ordered banana pudding, and Drew finally used a fork. Only after that did he wipe it with a wet napkin for 15 minutes, excluding any possibility of taking a DNA sample from it. Despite this, investigators still took the fork and sent it to the laboratory. Experts managed to search for tiny traces of DNA and showed partial matching with Stephanie's killer's DNA. However, the result was too imprecise because more biological material was needed for proper comparison. Eventually, detectives obtained a search warrant for Drew's workplace. They hoped they would still find some item containing his DNA there. But investigators feared that if he found out about this search, he might escape. Therefore, they decided to conduct it in evening hours. Among suspects' belongings, gloves were found which he must have used while working with chemicals. Detectives understood there might be his DNA inside them, so they took them, putting another pair instead. They still feared Drew might simply run away and disappear from their radars if suddenly realizes police has got hold of his DNA. Experts indeed found biological material inside gloves, and analysis showed full match. On October 18, 2005, police discreetly surrounded lab where man worked, waiting for him to come out. Investigators feared during arrest attempt inside premises he may take one of colleagues hostage or attack them. These fears turned out not groundless. When man exited building, immediately arrested him holding loaded gun. Apparently, he perfectly understood police is just one step away from catching him, didn't plan surrendering easily. At interrogation lasting over 6 hours, Drew didn't say a word. He silently refused food, water, barely moved. Getting warrant search apartment. Detectives found laundry baskets stolen from Stephanie's house. There also were 9 pistols, 2 rifles, 40 knives, sword. Among things, lock-picking tools, handcuffs. Detectives discovered notebook, dozens women name S. They immediately located them, checked everything all right with each of them. It turned out that one of the women was the very resident of his complex who complained about Drew during the survey. She said that the man was watching her on the street, and she felt uncomfortable with his gaze. Her fears were confirmed when police found this woman's lingerie in Drew's house. In his apartment, they also found a check made out to a woman who was murdered in 1999. Investigators discovered that at that time, Drew lived in her city. Furthermore, the woman was shot with a fairly rare caliber gun. But exactly such a weapon was found in the man's collection during the search. Thus, Drew became a suspect in this case. But first he had to stand trial for Stephanie's murder. A month after his arrest, the prosecution officially announced that they would seek the death penalty. However, before going to trial, it never came to pass. On January 1, 2006, he was found dead in his cell despite all precautions taken by authorities. Investigators had no doubts that it was Drew who killed Stephanie Bennett. But after searching his home arose an inevitable question. How many more victims could there be from this person? At least with a high degree of probability, he stood behind the murder of a woman in 1999. However, detectives were almost certain that Drew could have been involved in other crimes as well.